Um, welcome everybody to what will be our last webinar before a short summer's break. We are planning to be back on September the 16th, but are going to have a pause for some holidays and also to review how the webinars have been working and how we want to use them in the autumn. Anyone who has any views on that, please do drop us a line and let us know. We'll be very happy to hear. You should all be muted. If not, please do mute yourself. And as I say, if you can change your name to represent who you are in your organisation, that would be great. There is a chat box, as you probably know by now, being Zoom veterans. Please do use it to post any questions or make any comments on any of the speakers, and we will try and have time to cover those in due course. Now I'm going to kick off with a short introduction. My name is Adrian Sell. I'm Interim Chief Exec of the Community Foundation. After I've done my short introduction, I'll hand over to Amanda Ponsonby, who is High Sheriff. She will be interviewing 3 organisations, and I will leave you in suspense as to who they are, but I will go through my slides, and towards the end of those, that will reveal who we have with us. So far through the COVID response, we have been dispersing money that we've received from the National Emergencies Trust and through our own fundraising efforts locally. This had paused for a little while as we were working through a backlog, but is now moving again, and we are working through, and indeed I think have probably got through the backlog of applicants and have let people know and are finalising terms and conditions and so forth with people. So we've now paid out nearly £600,000 in grants. We're also working out what monies there will be left over from the National Emergencies Trust. It's a slightly moving picture because the funds coming from National Emergencies Trust and elsewhere obviously aren't necessarily standing still, but we do anticipate holding a final small grants round, the details of which we're not going to release until 1st of September or something like that, so that people have a chance to don't need to be worrying about applications and details through August, but we will provide details of that in early September. In terms of where the money has gone, as you can see, we've tried to make sure the county is covered. The actual amounts and where they're located aren't always exactly accurate because they represent the kind of head office of the organisation. So many of the organisations in Oxford City, for example, will reach out more broadly than Oxford itself, but they do give you a sense that we have covered the county and provided a lot of very, very critical support to organisations both in Oxford City and across our rural towns and villages. Moving on to Witney, which is the focus of today's webinar. Just over 100,000 people living in Witney, broadly in line with the national averages, although slightly higher than average older population, leading to a slightly higher dependency ratio for the district or for the parliamentary constituency area. And as you know, it's probably one of the most rural parts of Oxfordshire, indeed one of the most rural parts of the southeast of the county. And that's something that gets highlighted when you look at the levels of what we are defining as COVID vulnerability. So as you know, Witney is a relatively affluent area. There are some pockets of poverty in Carterton, Witney, Ensham, places like that, but broadly is a very, very wealthy area. It is, however, as I say, quite rural. The distance to services can be above average. And because of the higher than average older population, it means that it's assessed as being more vulnerable than many other areas in terms of the impact of COVID and people's ability to continue to access services through the lockdown. So today, the 3 people we have with us, and thank you all to all our speakers for attending. We have Pat Chrigwin, who will be known to many of you, I'm sure. She's manager at Volunteer Link Up in Witney. They do a huge amount of good work in organising, recruiting and supporting volunteers. And she and her team, I know, have been at the heart of efforts in the local area to support the local response. We're also very pleased to have Chris Francis, CEO of Meech, who are a Witney-based business who also have a charitable fund that they held with us and use to support good works of organisations across the Witney area and more widely. And then finally we have Ruth Madder, who's director of Bridewell Organic Gardens, who do therapeutic horticultural activities in the area. So without further ado, I will pass over to Amanda Ponsonby, who is going to interview our three guests. And I will turn off my screen share so you get a better view of our speakers. Thank you. Amanda, over to you.
Hello. Pat, I think if you unmute yourself, I think
yeah.
Can we Pat?
Yep.
Lovely to put a face to your name.
Uh-oh.
Well, I've heard about Volunteer Link Up before, and you're obviously a wonderful organisation. Been going for over 35 years, I think, in West Oxfordshire, and actually you were, I daren't say this, but you were made for COVID, because you've been doing what everyone is sort of started doing for years, finding the volunteers and putting them in touch with the right people. So it must have been very rewarding for you to see so many groups set up. And what was your role did you sort of mentor some groups, or how did it work from your organisation's point of view?
Essentially, I mean, Volunteer Link Up has been running since 1983, and our reason for being is to link people who have some time to spare with people and organisations that need help. So we started as what we call a good neighbour scheme. Essentially, what people used to do 50 or 60 years ago without anybody telling them what to do. But because of the state of the world and so on, what we find now in the world we live in is that you've got to take, you can't take any chances. And so we make sure that the vulnerable people we serve are served by people who have been DBS checked, who are insured, all of those various things that give people and their families a degree of confidence. So that's how we started off. We then found that people would come to us and say, well, no, I don't really want to do one-to-one things. So we found out what groups were existing in the area and became a volunteer centre for West Oxfordshire. It expanded over time. And so we normally would put on a volunteer recruitment fair annually so that local groups can sort of put out their wares and potentially recruit volunteers, but also inform the public of what they're doing and the difference they're making, particularly in West Oxfordshire. And of course, I think you met my colleague Rosie, and basically what she does is basically show other communities how to do what Volunteer Link Up does as far as recruiting volunteers, finding out if there's a need to begin with, then helping them to recruit volunteers, have all the policies and procedures put in place, then DBS checking the volunteers and getting individual schemes that meet the needs of the local community. So if a particular community has a very good bus route and people don't need transport per se, the need might be more for befriending or gardening or those sort of things. So it's finding the specific people to do those sort of things. So that's what we do. Equally, I've been, since the beginning of COVID, involved with the district council, who have been very good at bringing together local organisations, the various charities that serve West Oxfordshire, as well as social services and other statutory sector people, to basically inform each other and keep the communication lines going, to make sure that we all know what's going on. We've also we supported pre-COVID good neighbour schemes in Longhanborough and Freeland, particularly recently, and we're helping North Lee at the present time, because and we are promoting the fact that we can help communities formalise what had been originally an informal service, during COVID, because people weren't having direct contact with people, there was no money being exchanged, that sort of thing. They were delivering goods or whatever. There wasn't the need for the precise need for the security and so on. So, but now that things have eased up, we're making sure that people sort of form the groups properly, as it were.
Well, I think that's wonderful to know that there is a group like you. I mean, one way, and it's wonderful to hear how closely you're working with the local council and church groups, I imagine, and you know, all sorts of groups. But you're quite right that people are nervous, probably more so at the moment, and checks and things are important. I'm just wondering whether actually contact to villages, especially where there is loneliness, isolation, whatever, the parish councils are all still meeting, probably by Zoom.
Yeah.
But I wonder whether it would be useful to actually get your message to every parish council, because as you say, with people out and about, some of these wonderful volunteering groups have just started up and just did it, which was absolutely what was needed. But as you say, they perhaps didn't need to have all those checks. So do you have links with individual villages, or do you wait for people to come to you?
No. We regularly, we write pieces in village newsletters, and in fact we've got a piece going out to through the Oxfordshire Association of Local Councils to promote has been COVID groups suggesting that they might want to formalise. Although good neighbour schemes, by the very nature of what they are relatively informal. They have a sort of a foundation, and they have all the governance and so on. But we're meeting bespoke needs, and so that's, you know, like I say, well, we sort of would work through what the community needed and support them to make it proper, as it were.
And is majority of your work with the elderly, or how much do you do with vulnerable families who are, you know, trying to homeschool and juggle a number of things?
Yeah, I mean, it traditionally is older people. West Oxfordshire, particularly, is a growing. The elderly community is growing, as are the number of clients we particularly serve ourselves. Yeah, we do. We do deal with younger people, people with disabilities, people with mental health issues, we don't limit it. And in fact, I don't know that it's happened this year, but there was a young girl who regularly had to go for physiotherapy. The parents worked, so it wasn't possible and she was a young child, but the grandmother could go with her, but couldn't drive herself. So the grandmother and the child would go, and one of our volunteer drivers would take them down somewhere in the south of the county to have the physiotherapy that the child needed. And they did this every summer. They'd been doing it for several years. I'd like to say, I don't know what's happened this year, because everything's been basically shut down because of COVID.
And so how do you run your office? have you got other people helping you in the office, or yeah, I know you've got Rosie.
Yes, yeah. There are 4 of us. We work part-time. There are 2 ladies who, because of the size of our office, we can't cope with more than 2 in the office at any given time. But there are 2 ladies. We've actually just reopened our office on Monday, but they've been working from home, sort of answering the phone as per normal and emails and such like. So the work has gone on, but people work from home. But literally this week we have started back in the office. Between the 4 of us, we're the equivalent of 2 full-time staff members.
I think you must be overworked.
My husband would agree with you.
I mean, unfortunately, I suspect you're going to get many, many, many more requests actually going into the winter months, as I think we're all realizing this is not going to go away. A few months ago, I think perhaps lots of us thought we'll get over it, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but I don't think there is. And with darker days and colder weather, I think your services will be needed even more. So if someone, you know, and again, unfortunately, there will be people losing their jobs. So if somebody wanted, who, you know, perhaps had lost their job, was looking for a new job, but had some time to volunteer, do they approach you in the Witney office? Do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, I can put my details in the chat. That can be promoted, volunteer link up. Anybody that has access to the internet can just Google us, and our website has all our contact information. And we've obviously got a landline phone number for people to call, and they'll be delighted to welcome all the more hands on deck. That's all we need.
Absolutely. Oh, well, it's just wonderful to know that you are there, and I think the, you know, if I can lend my High Sheriff's name for this winter to help you, then I would be delighted to do so.
Excellent, excellent.
Especially as West Oxfordshire is my patch, so you know.
Good news. Yeah. We do appreciate all the support we can get. It's they say we're a very small charity, but what we do is such a simple idea. I don't know why everybody doesn't do it, because
exactly. It's a very simple idea, and it's so necessary. But you obviously have links with OCVA and the other part of Oxfordshire.
Well, the work we do with the Good Neighbour scheme is part of the community information network that Age UK have the contract for, and so we're subcontracted by Age UK to do that work. So yeah, Community First Oxfordshire, we work in partnership with with most of the big players. Don't we, Adrian?
Well, I think if there's some good that's come out of COVID, it is actually the big players all getting together and realizing, and it goes beyond, you know, party politics or anything. It's just humanity, and we all want to get through this and work as a team. So, I know, wonderful.
Thank you.
I'm always very conscious, Adrian, about the time on these. Things. I get so carried away with the first speaker that I suddenly realize that, you know.
I'll just zip it.
I think it's come to a natural pause, so that's probably a good time to move on. But thank you, Pat. It's always lovely to hear from you, and I know the value of the work you do and how hard you work without necessarily getting the thanks and recognition you probably deserve. So,
oh, bless you. Thanks very much, Adrian.
No, well, next time I'm in Witney, I'm actually coming to the fire station quite soon to do a drill evening with them. And so if I come earlier in the afternoon, I might have to call in and see you if someone's in the office.
We'd love to have a socially distanced cup of tea with you.
That would be really nice. Thank you. I think turning now to Chris Francis at Meech. And I did Google your company, Chris, and I thought, oh, wow, this is sort of you do the most amazing things. And obviously you've been incredibly successful. It's way beyond me because I was made to give all sorts of physics and all those sort of scientific things up and take arty subjects instead at school. But it's wonderful to see a really successful company in Witney, and also I hear that you are, a wonderfully successful company that feels that it has to give back to its local community, which is even better. And I'd love you to just tell me a little bit about your relationship with the local community.
Okay, so afternoon, everyone. Okay. We are two sentences about Meech. We are an international company. We manufacture products for a wide spectrum of industries, from aerospace, automotive, food, pharmaceuticals, medical, and develop very specialist products. And it puts us in a quite nice, unique position, which has been particularly engaging during the COVID period. But to what and I have to say we won 3 Queen's Awards for exports. That's enough of us. So the point about CSI in general for companies is enlightened self-interest. In reality, that's one way of looking at it. I could just hold myself up as being an incredibly generous type of person, but it is driven, corporate CSI is driven by enlightened self-interest. If you live in a community and you have a good name as a company, as you support local activities, your people are going to want to come and work for you. And today more than ever, people tend to want to work not just for the money, but for a whole variety of aspects, the quality of the balance between work and your own life, and so on. So it's a much wider set of interests that people have when applying for a job. So that's the enlightened self-interest part. Having said that, it goes further, because if we can help to work with schools to improve the life chances of, in our case particularly, 16 to 20-year-olds into work, getting good jobs from local schools, that makes sense for everybody. And we've done quite a few specific things for that. Okay, 2013 we started the Meech Centenary Trust Fund, which is operated through OCF. Mm-hmm. And as a shareholder thing, we fund that, and naturally encourage our staff to also work within that sphere. But the key aim of that trust is 16 to 18-year-olds back to work or into work. So there's a real gap between sort of 16, 18-year-olds, and they're not children, they're not adults, and there's a huge problem. I live near Cirencester, and we have a big issue there. Again, these 16 to 18-year-olds, they can't get places to live, they can't get a job, therefore. So I still don't understand why this gap still exists. No doubt somebody can explain it to me one day. But so our interest is 16 to 20-year-olds into work, and so on. And we do that through this funding into suitable charities, predominantly, or we try to do in West Oxfordshire, Jane and I have had numerous discussions about why more money from the OCF doesn't go to West Oxfordshire, but that's a different subject. to which we did start, and Ian Cameron, colleague of mine, we started the West Oxfordshire Business Partnership, which is a specific operation linking local companies, schools, colleges together to try to make a more formalized interaction. Obviously, with COVID, that's been a little bit difficult over the last 6 months, yes. But we had some good meetings with local schools, the Henry Boxes, the Burford schools and so on. And that's worked quite well. Oxlet being involved with that as well. And the number of people who are normal contributors to OCF who are involved in that. And like Ruth, Kate, I guess you're, where are you, Kate? I can't even see you. Kate, I guess you're involved with that or aware of that anyway. So that was beginning to show fruit. Hopefully after post-COVID that will be resurrected. Some of our staff members one particular staff member is an enterprise advisor at Henry Box School in Witney. So we're trying to, again, link schools, and schools are, they're open to the idea, but the trouble is they don't have any money and they don't have any time. And it's something I feel quite strongly about, that schools really need to invest much more in planning the future, or helping to plan the future prospects of their students, particularly even as early as, very much as early as 13, and I mean, like you said, Amanda, you didn't do any sciences, maybe you should have done. And was that down to careers advice or lack of careers advice, or the type of school you went to? I don't know.
No careers advice.
No careers advice at all. Well, I think careers advice was an ex-captain in the army who, yeah. And even in the best schools, my son wanted to be a doctor and was told he didn't need to do biology. Strictly speaking, that's true. You had to do chemistry, but you don't have to do biology. But then it cuts out 50% of the best medical schools, so it wasn't the greatest bit of advice. Anyway, we'll go off the subject. But yeah, no, I mean, that's careers advice is hugely important, and we see it as very important to try to energize, get people to come in and see what we do, get excited by manufacturing, by science and technology. It's a way more. I'm a chartered accountant. That's as boring as hell. It's next to lawyer, legals, as being boring. But the world of manufacturing and making things is incredibly exciting. And so that's our job, to try to excite local school children, or young adults.
I think that is so exciting, because I see this time and time again, and living here in West Oxfordshire, I mean, I'm interested in the rural economy and horticulture and all those things, and there are some children aged, as you say, 13, who that they're not going to want to, or they just find it hard to engage with algebra or something, but they might be a wonderful market gardener. And actually, I think careers advice, as you say, it shouldn't just wait till 16. It does need to almost start a bit earlier, or at least introducing ideas to them. But that's a whole other subject. It'd be nice to chat to you one day about it. And has COVID actually affected your business? I mean, it sounds as if you make all sorts of amazing things. Were you able to keep the workforce going, or did you have a lot of working from home, furloughing people?
Sorry, well, I've got the question, so I can give you the answer. Sorry, not everybody else has the question. Yeah, okay, sorry, that's true. Okay, well, yeah, we lost about half a day on the first Monday of lockdown, and we all stood around or came in and thought, oh shoot, what are we meant to be doing now? And it was chaos. I mean, it was well, literally making it up. But that's a different question, I suppose. We obviously had to implement social distancing, which cut our production area quite substantially, but we had furloughed some of the office people who were, well, we had furloughed them, and most of the others, almost all the others, were working from home. So I think we had, for the first few weeks, probably 2 or 3 people in the office, but we had 60 to 80% of our production, because all we did was move our production into our meeting rooms and everywhere else. So that worked quite well. And by the end of, but by the end of June, we had everybody back from furlough. We had everybody, well, nearly full production capacity. But we still have quite a few people working from home, which curiously has turned out to be not as bad as I had expected. Somebody pointed out, if somebody's going to be lazy, they're going to be lazy in the office and you won't notice because they're there. Working from home and they've been given a certain set of objectives, you kind of know at the end of the week, at the end of the fortnight, when they haven't done them, there's kind of no place to hide. So I suspect many other companies have found that, and I therefore believe that we will see flexible working becoming probably the norm for a number of people who, I mean, clearly we can't make stuff in people's homes. Well, that's not strictly true. We did actually, but broadly speaking, you can't. So for office workers, marketing, all these other jobs, yeah, well, we still want to make sure that they come into the office and have the team quarters, the chat over the coffee machine and so on. And that's, so we're trying to get back everybody at least one day a week on a rotating basis. The biggest challenge that COVID has brought for us, I mean, our sales, we're above budget. I mean, we've had a spectacular, from a business point of view, because our business is worldwide. So when Europe closed down, or the UK closed down, China was going gangbusters. So it's kind of, we are in an embarrassingly good position from that point of view. But I think the head of a legal firm said to me, he said, it's like running 2 businesses. I've got all the COVID issues, and I've still got to run an international firm of lawyers. And I know exactly where, I mean, the most stressful thing is trying to make decisions in absence of any precedent. You've never done it before. I mean, in a completely new world, and you're thinking, well, is this fair to everybody? Is this unfair? I mean, it's been for us, it's been that's the serious challenge. The actual bit of running the daily business has seemed rather straightforward. And I think I think the other point I wanted to make, I'm conscious of my time, but the other point I wanted to make was that in the March to June period, it was like we had a very clear enemy, and that was COVID-19. And it was incredible to see how people found solutions to problems that had been hitherto insoluble. So the can-do mentality was actually really quite exciting. What we found over the last 3 or 4 weeks, when we're back in this kind of new normal, is that it's depressingly horrible, because you can't plan, there's no certainty, you can go out but you can't go out, you can do this but you can't do that. So we've kind of won the battle, but we're now in this sort of no man's land of, well, what happens next, guys?
I know, and no knowing how long it's going to last. And the most important thing, though, is for us is we've had to make sure that we are talking to all the staff who are not here
or indeed making sure that they have throughout this period been okay, because some people are working from very small flats with children and so on. So that's been our biggest challenge, really, is to ensure that the mental health and health of our staff has been too badly affected, and that's been quite hard on our HR people.
Yes, and I feel that well, you've touched on homeschooling just then. That could become an issue if the schools aren't able to get back in the autumn, and I'm sure I'll be talking to Ruth about the mental health impact of, you know, shorter days and darker days, and yeah, I mean, there is the enemy is still there, but he's COVID it morphs into so many different places and guises, and as you say, to begin with, we knew what we were facing, and now it's sort of creeping everywhere, and it's very unclear how we can plan. But I think the answer is keep talking to everyone, and it's so, I mean, to have an enlightened company like yours in Witney is absolutely wonderful. And how can you encourage other companies to be? I mean, I'm sure there are many, but
Well, that's why
your business partnership is that. Do you talk to other businesses to encourage them to do have the same sort of outlook as you?
Yeah, I mean, that is the fun. That is exactly the purpose of the West Oxfordshire Business Partnership, is to get other companies in the area to talk to each other, to talk to schools, to talk to the appropriate voice. If I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about, it's mainly because I don't. Because that's done by Ian Cameron, who's our marketing director, who started. Well, basically, I fell out. Well, I didn't fall out, but I had an argument with Jane about the fact that not enough money was coming to West Oxfordshire. I said, we're going to create a West Oxfordshire business, well, it wasn't called that, but a West Oxfordshire Community Foundation, so we can get some money out of it.
Well, I hope we've done something to redress that through the COVID response, Chris.
It's still the lowest amount, I noticed.
No, I think Henley's lower.
Yeah, I think Henley might be lower. Anyway, I'm aware that the final interview is going to be one very close to Amanda's heart, and I'm sure you're going to want to spend some time on. So thank you, Chris. It's been really interesting to hear you talk, and I think a lot of people will be able to identify with the feeling of having to do two jobs as COVID hit, one running the organisation and one doing the COVID job as well. Anyway, Amanda, do you want to turn to our final interviewee?
Yes. Ruth, it's very nice to see you.
You too, Amanda.
And I felt for you so much. I have to say to all the other speakers that actually I had visited Bridewell last winter because I knew it was somewhere that I would want to sort of champion. And it is the most special place. And I thought of you, Ruth, and all the people who help you and all the people you help, because it must have been heartbreaking for you when lockdown hit. We were just approaching the most lovely nurturing time in a garden, and what a spring we had. And all those people you were trying to help would have benefited so much, you know, just working in the sunshine, seeing everything come to life, and you had to close down. So how did you cope when that happened?
Yeah, it's exactly as you said, Amanda. Those first days when we realised that week, as we crept up to lockdown, realising that we would need to close the gardens and that gardeners wouldn't be able to be there. In some ways it was easy, so we knew our response needed to be to continue to support everybody who would normally be working at the gardens. So we have around 50 gardeners who would be attending, working at the gardens 1 or 2 days a week. So that was an easy answer. We weren't just going to shut the gardens and then wait until we reopened. But the challenging question was, well, how do we provide an appropriate support in some kind of way that's sustainable? So we're a very small team. The support workers who manage the gardens and our team of volunteers and provide that therapeutic support to gardeners are the equivalent of 2.5 people. We have 4 members of staff at the gardens, 5 members of staff. And it's a lot of work to think we're going to have to manage the whole site, 5 acres, a walled garden and a vineyard, probably with no volunteers, certainly in the heart of lockdown, and be able to provide some kind of remote support to people who were at home in a time of, we expected would be increased anxiety, heightened anxiety for everybody, but enormous uncertainty for people. So where there were easy decisions, okay, we need to provide continued support. They were the quick ones to make and to reassure staff, and also to try and frame a support, to make decisions around what that support looked like, knowing it would need to be sustainable. So we weren't thinking this is 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. What would it look like if we had to carry on working in this way for 6 months? This needs to work for those, for our staff. It needs to be manageable for our staff as well as for the people who we were supporting. So there were lots of points where we would stop weekly and reflect on, is this still working? Do you think you could still carry on at this pace? And then having to adjust and reset expectations when people were saying, no, this is too much. And decisions about the garden, sorry, Amanda, the garden, as you said, it's, when we think about what makes Bridewell work, it's those supportive relationships with staff and volunteers and that gardeners build with each other. But it's also the garden as a place, it has a character of its own that becomes really important in people's recovery as they're learning to trust themselves, learning to trust others that they're working with, and starting to build self-esteem and confidence. It's about the activities they've been engaged with at the garden and the role that the garden has played in their recovery. So we knew we couldn't simply mothball the garden and just pick it up and again. We had to look after it because it has such an important role as a symbol for people's recovery, and not just those people who we were supporting, who we're supporting at the moment, but also people who are still connected with us through social media, Facebook or Instagram, and who return to help us with the harvest each year in the vineyard or for our summer barbecue. There are people who've left us over the last 2.5 decades, who still hold Bridewell in their hearts as a place that helped them recover after a time of crisis. So making sure that we looked after the site in some kind of caretaking mode, without putting too much on staff who had so much to handle in those weeks.
So were you telephoning the people who would have been coming to you, or how were you engaging with the people who've been referred to you who should be in the garden?
Yeah, our initial response was telephone support. So on a Wednesday, if that was normally your day at the gardens, you'd get a phone call from a member of staff to check in. That was our first response. But we realized pretty quickly we're not remote counsellors. That's not the role normally of our support workers. So we had to think about how those support calls focused on what Bridewell does well. So thinking about working in nature, thinking about gardening or activities that bring our focus together, rather than focusing on somebody's mental health issues. That's not normally the heart of the conversations at Bridewell. So I remember it was in one of those early weeks, one of the support workers shared experiences of having arrived at the gardens one morning, walked around a perfect spring day, and using that walk around the gardens in their conversations and talking that person through the things that they'd seen at the gardens, the changes they'd seen, reflecting on a corner of the garden that person had helped plant out or remove weeds back in the autumn, and thinking about the changes that they'd seen. So we made sure we were thinking about what it is that we do well and trying to focus on that, and the characteristics of working at Bridewell. So there's always a humour, as you say, when we're working there with people right through into the heart of winter. We're only closed for a few days over Christmas and New Year, so people are there when the temperature's down to freezing, and normally working with no electricity, no lighting at the gardens, no internet, so that the humour has to be an important part of our work, and also really focusing on nature and gardening and spending time outside. So asking people how they've been able to engage with nature that week, or what plans they had to make use of their space, whether it's a local park or their street, or growing herbs, or whatever it is that they have accessible to them. We also just use simple things like sending postcards with recent images of the garden. So we have some people who we support who are not so well connected, who aren't using the internet, wouldn't normally be accessing email or social media. So we knew we would need to keep in contact with some people by post as well, posting seeds and postcards or newsletters. And we found that people really enjoyed that, actually coming together as a community and sharing their own experiences. So we'd have people sending pictures of plants that they'd noticed transforming through the spring or blossom in their garden. One gardener who'd taken poppy seeds, and that was one of the first things that they'd grown from Bridewell the year before, and they were really excited to see them coming up over the beginning of summer. So we would send weekly or fortnightly newsletters to share experiences from our volunteers and gardeners, and we had really good responses from that.
And the grant from the Resilience Fund, did that go to help with all of that, sort of adapting to deal with COVID?
Yes, yeah. We in a normal year we raise about half of our core costs through fundraising activities, and so at the beginning of COVID, seeing the spring and early summer cancelled, there was a lot of anxiety and real concern from staff and from those who we support about whether we would be able to continue, or whether we would have to pause our service for a period. And that the fund from OCF was a real lifeline. It gave us enormous confidence that we would be able to provide some kind of continued service, which for people who've experienced serious mental health problems, and we'd spent that time to build relationships of trust within Bridewell, for them to know. We had feedback from a few people saying, just knowing that the Bridewell team were there, that people who knew them and who they built a relationship with, and who knew their history and who understood their situation, that they could get hold of them was a real lifeline for them. And also to know that the gardens were being cared for was a real help. So we were really lucky. We had a number of volunteers who their circumstances, and they live very local, they were able to come to the gardens once a week, for example, and help keep on top of that essential maintenance, so that staff could focus on providing that remote support.
Because I think you touched on the fact that there's been a lot recently in papers, magazines and books about how gardening is such good therapy for mental health and everything. But I was talking to a very well-known garden writer the other day, and he had to review some book, and he was saying, well, it's not always the case, because if you garden, things die, and that can be quite gloomy, and you can get quite angry. But I think most of it, as you touched on, is working with others. I mean, there are times that it's lovely to be by yourself, just pruning something, but actually it's the comradeship of working with others and sharing things that probably has the most beneficial mental sort of effect on your mental well-being.
Yes.
So, well, I'm here as a volunteer if you need it. There was, I don't know, did you read about the Wyfold vineyard down in the Chilterns? And it was run by Barbara Laithwaite. She recognised very early on in lockdown that and she only has a small vineyard, but the vines were planted 2.3 metres apart. So she let it be known in her local village and community that if anyone was lonely or if anyone just wanted to get out and didn't have a garden, would they ring her, because she could assign them one row of vines to come and do a little bit of work. And I've spoken to her, and I'm actually going to go down and visit her. But perhaps when it comes to the autumn and you're busy harvesting or whatever, that might be something to think about.
Yes, yeah. So, you're right, what you said there, Amanda, about gardening having its highs and lows. You talk about a garden writer describing that, and it was that late frost that we saw, and it hit our vineyard very hard. I had a conversation with a member of staff that day who I think it was a Monday morning, and it felt, this is too much.
Yes.
It was one of the early reviews of what was happening next around lockdown, realizing this was really going to be a long period of uncertainty, and then seeing our vineyard hit in that way. But as a team, people were able to rally together. And again, all of our gardeners we had some wonderful support back from the people who we are supporting, reassuring staff, thanking them for doing a good job, reassuring them that the garden would bounce back. And as you say, it's that working as a group in the community together, supporting each other around gardening as a medium that really has its impact.
Well, I think you do a wonderful job. And when will you be able to open up again? Do you know? Because I know Farmability have just started getting their co-workers, farmers, back to their projects. Will you be able to start before
we have? We are in, I think, our third week of reopening. We've reopened again, thinking about being able to be open in some kind of sustainable way. So we've started with reduced capacity. We bring a number of gardeners to the site by minibus. There's no public transport that comes to us. We're outside Witney between North Lee and Finstock, so a sort of single track road. A number of people drive themselves there, but we need to be able to bring people on a minibus in a safe way. So again, wearing masks and following the guidelines at the moment. And we know that people are needing additional support at the moment. So unfortunately, we've opened with a smaller number of people per day, but everyone is still able to return. And we'll review that at the end of August and see what changes can be made. And certainly to ready ourselves as we start to see more referrals coming through. So we work very closely with other organisations within Oxfordshire as part of the mental health partnership, voluntary sector, as well as the NHS. And each organisation has shared their concerns and anecdotal evidence so far of that increased demand that we're going to see for all services, including recovery services. And there's a lot of concern about how we will deliver that, given the restrictions that everyone is going to have to continue working under.
Someone suggested me that there should be a natural health service in Oxfordshire, and I think it's a good name, and maybe there's something that a group of us could get together and talk about and see how we can, how I can support all of you, and because I'm sure it's going to be really needed. So anyway, thank you so much, Ruth, for everything you're doing, and I will telephone you very soon.
Thank you, Amanda. Let's speak soon.
Yes.
Thank you. That was really fascinating to hear, and I love the idea of a natural health service. I think that would be wonderful. I'd also love to visit Bridewell at some point. Being probably more of a part-time gardener than I should be, but I do enjoy it when I get the time.
That's a beginning. That's a beginning.
Well, Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Pat, and thank you very much to Amanda for hosting another fascinating chat. As ever, we will be sharing the entire video and some snippets on our YouTube channel so that people who couldn't make it along here today can watch them, and we know that those are being used and enjoyed. If you have any thoughts or feedback on how we can reshape these webinars in the autumn, then very happy to hear it. And if you're not on our mailing list, then please do sign up and drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Other than that, I hope you have a good summer break. I hope you get a break. You've probably earned one, and thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you in September. Thank you.